Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from the Lincoln Memorial in DC. Now I know I've already talked about the Chinese semiconductor shift in policy here in the United States, but there's been a lot that has developed over the last 48 hours, so I feel I need to do a quick update. The biggest thing to understand is not only is China now unable to import the equipment to make semiconductors, or the tools to maintain and operate the equipment, or the software that's necessary to operate the equipment, or any mid or high level chips at all. Now, any Americans who want to assist with the Chinese semiconductor industry have to make a choice. You can have your job with China or you can have your citizenship. As a result, within about 48 hours of the policy being adopted last Friday, every single American citizen who was working in China in the industry either quit or their companies relocated their entire division so they wouldn't have to lose their staff. For all practical purposes, the Chinese semiconductor industry of everything over like Internet of Things level of quality is now dead. And that has a lot more implications than it sounds. The Chinese have proven incapable over the last 25 years of advancing sufficiently technologically in terms of the intellectual heft that's required to operate this industry beyond being able to simply operate the facilities that make the low-end chips, and even that had to be managed by foreigners. So there is no indigenous capacity here to pick this up and move on. And since the United States has basically corralled the Japanese and the Dutch, two very pro-American countries from a strategic sense, to join in this ban, really all that's left is potentially Korea and Taiwan. And even if they were fully on board, which they're not, that is not enough to carry all the water that needs to be carried. In terms of industrial follow-on, this doesn't just mean that the Chinese are never going to be able to make the chips that go into cars or computers. It also means that any industry that is dependent upon the hardware dies. So when you think of some of the technological advancement that the Chinese have made in recent years, things like AI and mass automation, monitoring their own population, the Great Firewall, hypersonic cruise missiles, a space program, supercomputers. If the Chinese want to do any of this, they have to buy chips basically on the gray market, purchase pre-finished products, and then pull out the chips and apply them to something they weren't designed for. We are looking at least an order of magnitude drop in the Chinese capacity to operate in anything that is tech-focused. This is a deal killer, not just for the industry, but for a modern technocratic system. From a technological point of view, China is done. The question, of course, is what do they do about it? We are dealing with a one-man government here that's a little petulant when they don't get their way, and where the bureaucracy is either completely static or over-enthusiastic and does things like wolf warrior diplomacy. So I would expect this kind of bag of dicks diplomacy that has evolved in China to get this hard and loud, which will probably only encourage the Americans to act more harshly and start targeting some of the lower end semiconductors. And that's going to have consequences throughout the world, but we'll get to that another time. All right, take care. Hey everyone, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Colorado. It is the 27th of September, and in the last 2 or 3 days, there have been a number of instances in the Baltic Sea that have caused damage to the Nord Stream pipeline system. There are 4 trunk lines, 2 part of Nord Stream 1 that have been operational for years, and 2 part of Nord Stream 2, who were finished about a year ago but haven't come online yet, that have now been damaged by unknown forces. The damage is in 70 meters of water, so about 220 feet. And the problem here is narrowing down the suspect pool is impossible. Because at that depth, if you have a couple of tanks and you know what you're doing, pretty much any commercial scuba diving operator could have gotten down that deep and, basically taken a pickaxe to a pipeline or something a little bit more sophisticated. So that narrows the suspect pool not at all. There are a number of theories out there, none of which I can put my finger on because none of them really make great sense. One is that the US would do this in order to make sure the Europeans would never use Russian natural gas again. Okay, but the Russians turned off the pipes themselves, which is a much better PR battle from the American point of view than putting a couple of holes in a pipe which could be repaired. Some say this was the Ukrainians. That makes a degree of sense. However, the Ukrainians have natural gas pipes that are still operating that flow through the war zones and Ukrainian territory onto Europe, and it would be easier just to take out those. The Germans, probably not. They're the ones who are desperate for the gas. I think it might be interesting to point the finger at a number of the Nordic states, whether it's Sweden, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, or maybe even Poland, because they have a vested interest in seeing this line go offline, because it would force the rest of the Europeans to finally suck it up and move on without Russia. That makes a little bit more sense. But again, this is relatively easily repairable unless the pipeline is like had a stick of dynamite put inside of it, as opposed to someone just poking a hole at it. So no good theories hold up to any sort of scrutiny, and we have no idea. Now, the pipelines were all off. Nord Stream 2 has never been turned on. Nord Stream 1, the Russians turned off 2 weeks ago in order to punish the Europeans. So it's not like there's any immediate danger here, aside from simply a methane leak into the atmosphere, which is, in general, no bueno. I'm sorry that doesn't give you any clarity. It's a confusing situation. The most important thing from my point of view is that someone out there has now decided that core economic infrastructure is a viable target. And while it's not hard if you know what you're doing to get down the Nord Stream to poke a hole in it, there's a lot of infrastructure elsewhere, land pipelines, for example, that are far more vulnerable. And if the gloves are really coming off in this conflict, the economic damage we've seen to Europe to this point is only just now beginning. Okay, that's it from me. Until next time. Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from the DC area, where I'm about to give a work presentation in a room without electricity because the power's been out for the last 12 hours, so that's fun. 2 things I wanted to talk about today. The first is the nature of the economic system that we're trying to wrestle with right now. The new book is called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and that's in many ways. A lot of the tools that we have developed to regulate the economic system, most notably interest rates at the federal bank level, we're not sure if they're going to work anymore. The whole idea of interest rates is that you make the cost of borrowing higher so that demand becomes more expensive, so that people and companies do less of it. But for that to work, you have to have consumption as a primary driver in your economic system. Most of the world doesn't have that any longer. Most of the advanced world hit the point of no return with their demographic aging back in the 90s, and places like Germany and Italy and Japan now have more people in their 50s than their 40s than their 30s and their 20s and so on. Now in the United States it hasn't hit nearly as hard, but we still have this huge generation, the baby boomers, who are retiring, and a very small generation, the Zoomers, who are coming into the system. Right now, in calendar year 2022, that's a shortage of 400,000 workers. And by 2034, that number will have increased to 900,000. This is structural inflation, and this is a problem on the supply side. And when you raise the cost of borrowing, it doesn't just impact people who are trying to buy a car or a destroyer. It also affects people who are trying to build out industrial plant and productive capacity and train new workers. It's not clear to me whether in places where this demographic decline is advanced, such as Germany, where interest rates even work anymore. Because you are capable of strangling now supply with it, and it doesn't do anything to demand because there isn't any. The economic rules of the past may not apply anymore. Now in the book, I call this something called the end of more. The idea that every economic model that we have developed in the last 500 years, whether it's fascism or socialism or communism or capitalism, they were designed for an environment where the pie got a little bit bigger every year, largely because of population growth. That's no longer true. And so when I look at the problems that the Fed, oh yeah, that lovely sound in the background, those are emergency generators. Fun touch, huh? When you look at the problem that the US Federal Reserve is dealing with right now, they would like to get inflation under control, and interest rates are the tool they have. But if we're in a world where the normal relationships between demand and consumption and supply and production are somewhat out of whack and might not go back, it's not clear to me that they can raise interest rates to dampen demand without also crushing supply, because we've never had a significant problem on the supply side before. And because we are now facing the greatest labor inflation in American history, raising interest rates just might not be the right tool. And then it comes to the executive branch, and that's a whole other discussion of whether the Biden administration is up to the challenge. Okay, so that's the first big topic. I'm not sure that the tools apply anymore. The second big topic, We made the bestseller list. We came in number 12 on the NYT bestseller list late last night. I'm still trying to calm down, but thank you all. Thank you to everyone who helped put the book together. Thank you to everyone who shared it with your friends. Thank you to everybody who bought a copy or who says they're going to buy a copy. This has been a wild ride for the last 4 months with the Russia war. I feel like I've dropped the ball in so many ways because there's so much going on. I'm doing my best to keep up. My team is fantastic, but ultimately it's for the viewers and the readers out there that have made this happen. So thank you. Okay, that's it from me. I'm gonna go see if I can find a place with at least 1 bar of signal to upload this, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.